we should probably get going. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Delighted you could join us, and we're excited to show you. Let me turn my phone off. Delighted to show you our new textile line that we're launching. So welcome. I see we've got, let's see, the numbers are climbing. This is like a telethon. Okay, so we've got 51. But I realize everyone's time is valuable these days, and perhaps even more precious in a different way. And I hope you're all staying safe and healthy and as happy as we can. So all things considered. So Allison Kettlewell, who you can also see on the screen there, whom I believe most of you know. Allison is my super duper fantastic, wonderful head of our production of our product lines, and specifically started off 10 years ago with me doing our textiles. And I've always had a passion for textiles. I use them in my interiors all the time. I love to use vintage textiles and antique textiles. And they've always inspired me. So that was what got me to be crazy enough to do my own textile line 10 years ago. So we're celebrating our 10th year with SUZANNE Tucker Home. And we attempt to put out a collection every 6 months, so twice a year. Thank God it's not quite like fashion, where I have to think of a resort collection and then some. But we're a small boutique operation, as I think you all know, and pride ourselves on having great quality, first and foremost, a beautiful hand to our textiles, certainly a luxury to them, and keeping a good price point, throwing in the special things that are a bit pricier, but always being able to coordinate the line together. So this collection was actually inspired by this particular embroidery, which I saw over a year ago in Italy. And I was so inspired by it. And I said, oh, it's just, you know, this beautiful garden path. And it inspired us to think about the collection, because I like to name things in terms of the theme. And so we decided to look at a garden theme, but it's not a garden collection and it's not outdoor fabric, but I'm always inspired by history. I love biographies. I love learning about people from the past and what inspired them, whether they be designers or architects or landscape and garden designers. So this is what inspired us to produce this collection. And then I named it after famous garden and landscape architects, or garden designers and landscape architects, because there is a difference, in the past. So this particular one I decided to name after Gertrude Jekyll, who was really one of the most famous landscape architects in the UK. And she worked very closely with Edwin Lutyens. So for the architecture buffs out there, and every architect I know reveres Lutyens' work. And most of his houses actually had Gertrude Jekyll's inspiration. So you can see here from one of her gardens, Munstead Wood, this lovely palette of these soft hues. And you know, the English gardens are so seductive with how they terrace their patterning of flowers and shrubs and mix in the colors and variations of leaves and so forth. So we named this one Lamb's Ear. And for you gardeners out there who know what Lamb's Ear is, it's that beautiful, you know, soft gray palette, and very subtle, but it's so soft. So Gertrude is sort of one of our new favorites. And this is a beautiful image of one of Gertrude Jekyll's gardens, and the garden path, of which we thought that satin element of Gertrude is a really beautiful aspect to it. Pretty in pink. The pink is actually the one that inspired me. And I know there's those who love pink, those who hate pink, whatever. I loved this one. I just thought it was so dreamy and yummy. It could go very playful. It could also go quite sophisticated. Allison, you want to talk about the construction of this?
Sure. I was just getting ready to say that I wanted to point out that one of the interesting things about this fabric is the play on matte and shiny. So in the ground, you have this beautiful shiny satin weave that gives it a really lovely texture. And then behind the embroidery, you have more of a matte weave. So it's just a nice little play on texture in addition to the really beautifully done embroidery on top.
Mm-hmm. And of course, blue and white. I mean, who doesn't love blues and whites in these variations and shades? This one that we named Bluebell appropriately, in a field of bluebells, you see, those are hyacinths, but you do see fields of bluebells in England. And she was known also for sort of her large swaths of beautiful color. And she was a prolific book writer, by the way, for those of you who have interest. She wrote about 15 books, I believe, and she did over 100 houses with Lutyens. Ah, her books, there you are. Yeah, they're quite dear if you can still get them. And then Penelope. So Penelope is rather a fun one. So Penelope Hobhouse. We named this textile after her, again, with the sort of almost tendrils and so forth. Penelope is still alive. She is 91. And for those of you who may have heard her on her lecture circuit years ago, she is an engaging speaker, and her gardens are absolutely enchanting. And she does a wonderful play, again, with color and with structure in a garden, and has the most incredible depth of knowledge. So we thought creating this textile and naming it after Penelope, we thought this spoke to her complexities of a beautiful pattern and her undulating garden paths with beautiful borders that only the English do so beautifully. And I love here with this color in sort of the grays and so forth. And then this one, which is very handsome in these beautiful sort of beet and chocolate colors. Make a beautiful library. It would be just a stunning sort of, gentleman's dressing room or bedroom, and that sort of touch of that burgundy that you get with the overlay of the dyes, I think is really quite beautiful. And Allison, this one is in.
I can add.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say textile.
Oh, I was just going to say.
Yes.
I hate Zoom. So this one, just to point out that I'll go ahead. I'll keep talking. I'm sorry. Just to point out something about all of our prints is that we love this kind of worn patina effect that we work really hard to get. And so if you look closely at this, it looks very much almost like an antique textile. And that's a real achievement to work with the mills to get the kind of perfect background texture. And then on top of that, just a note, our prints are sometimes finished 2 or 3 times just to give them a really nice drape and an extra soft, supple feel to them, which is really important.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important point to bring up is a finish. And you hear people talk about the finish, obviously on furniture and a table, but in textiles, it refers to the process after it has been printed or dyed, and it's what makes the hand of a textile very supple, soft, malleable. It gives it that luxury. So when you feel a printed textile that feels a bit gummy, it's a personal pet peeve of mine. It's because it hasn't had a finishing process put to it. And it is one more, sometimes 2 more steps that textile manufacturers, we have to do it. But that's what happens when you feel that gumminess. It hasn't had that finish put onto it. So it's really lovely to have that. So indigo. In Penelope. I thought this was particularly beautiful because, sorry, I've got bells and whistles going off. Because of this indigo inspiration. We all think of indigo with India, and it actually was in Peru way back centuries ago. But this is an indigo mushroom. So who knew? But this is a Lacticarius indigo mushroom. So a little botany as we're at this. And Jeffrey. Jeffrey is a texture that I know I am personally going to be using a lot on my projects. It's going to be a go-to. And it has a beautiful soft weave to it. It's a soft, subtle chenille, and named after Jeffrey Jellicoe. And Jeffrey Jellicoe was quite an extraordinary landscape architect and worked all over Europe. He was really quite an inspiration for many other landscape architects to come, and garden designers. And he had he could draw beautifully. He had a beautiful ability to sketch. His gardens were layered and very structured. And hence why I thought with this one, let's name it after Jeffrey Jellicoe. You can see here his simplicity, and he would just create that beautiful runnel and just have the simplicity of a garden and the simplicity of color. And I thought how appropriate with this really lovely weave. As you can see, it's not a pattern per se, it's more of a texture that gives interest and catches the light beautifully.
Much more structured.
Mm-hmm. And the content, Allison?
This is one of those a little bit of everything fabrics. It has linen, some cotton, some poly, and some viscose.
Mm. And I love this one in yarrow. It's beautiful, soft color. Again, it goes with everything. And then next, we did quite a few colorways, which you'll be able to see. And next, Nora. So for those of you who know who Nora Lindsay was, she was a fascinating woman. She was a socialite, not at all professionally trained, very beautiful, as you can see in this lovely portrait. And between the wars, she was essentially, she was going through a divorce, and she was forced to figure out how to earn a living and make an income, which for back then, a lady of her stature was quite a challenge. So she had an amazing eye, apparently. She had a great eye for beauty, a great eye for gardens. And so she gravitated towards garden design. And again, no formal training, but she had a way of putting together color and designing gardens. And she did many, many of ones in England that are very famous. She did the garden at Cliveden. So for those of you who've been to Cliveden, she did many of those. And she had a way with creating water gardens. So I took this beautiful pattern, which is from an 18th century document, and named it after Nora because of her almost, sophisticated yet lyrical way of putting together colors. And I will tell you that all these beautiful photographs are courtesy of Vera in my office, who's behind it, but the mouse at the moment. She's the girl behind the mouse, and clicking through this for us. And Vera is gosh, been in my office now for over 7 years, almost 9, I think. And she has a way with photography that is just so gifted. So thank you, Vera. And I'm sure you all know her from our various marketing efforts. And here's Nora again. It was a wonderful book by Allison Hayward on Nora Lindsay, for those of you who are interested. But again, sort of her era of the clothing, the style, and I felt that this particular pattern lent itself to that ethereal quality of that era. And Vita, the infamous Vita Sackville West. Again, there's many books written on Vita, but this is also taken from a document, and it did it in 4 colorways. And Vita particularly had an eye for gardens. Again, no formal training, Ladies weren't brought up that way back then. And as you can see here, this wonderful portrait by Laszlo, I think it's covering my screen, but she was passionate about gardens. And she, being a woman, couldn't inherit her family home of Knowle. And if you've ever been to Knowle, Knole, in England, you should visit. It's a National Trust property. And so she built this garden, did this garden at Sissinghurst, which you can also visit. And I felt that sort of this textile spoke to many aspects of gardens that she had designed. And she was quite sophisticated and chic, and sort of this monochromatic aspect to her, and had just again this sort of ethereal quality to her gardens. One that I particularly love is her white garden, and it's quite famous. And again, someone with no training and come up with the idea of let's create a white garden. And you see here at Sissinghurst thistles. And it's an all white garden, which I think is quite beautiful. And I love that. I love doing themes with textile lines, obviously, but also with, you know, some of my projects and houses. And also just in general, I think it's great when you have a theme that you can run with. So here's a picture of her white garden, which really just breathtaking. Again, these subtle hues of grays and whites and these stone colors. Just fantastic. And then this blossom blush color, that lovely climbing rose, which I believe is a Sally Holmes, for those of you who are going to put that in your questions. I think it's a Sally Holmes, which does very well in wet-ish climates, by the way. But thought that the pretty hint of the blush is just enough of a touch of color for this textile to balance with the coolness of the gray. And then Russel Page. So this, as you see, is very constructed. Allison, the content in this?
This one, I believe, is 100% linen. It might have a little, actually, let me tell you for sure. It might have a little binder in it. So it's mostly linen with some poly to give it a little strength and hold it together.
Body. Yes, and again, this has been finished beautifully. It has a very supple hand. This wanted to create something, you know, that was more structured, geometric, had that intricate weave to it, and then named it after Russel Page because that's what he did with his gardens. He was a prolific landscape architect. He had a wonderful way of describing himself, and he said, "I'm the most famous garden designer no one's ever heard of." But when if you don't have his books and are interested, his books are quite fabulous, and it shows the depth and sophistication and breadth of his gardens. Again, he was all about the structure. So looking at a textile and for inspiration, and I thought, you know, this is about the structure of this textile. And he was known for cascading his gardens and having this balanced geometric symmetry to them, which you'll find in Russel. And that's the cinder colorway on the left. And the pebble colorway. And there is Russel Page drawing. And this is one of my favorite books. If you have books on gardens and you don't have this, which you must, it's really an important book to have. And as you can see, that structure of that beautifully laid out parterre, and just how it terraces down and the sketch that accompanies it. So this actually was the inspiration for me to name this textile after Russel Page. Here's another one in stone.
It's the whole collection.
Yeah, this is the whole collection right now, again, inspired by the original floral embroidery. And then it launched into this whole concept of naming these textiles after infamous and famous garden designers from the past. So, although I should correct that because Penelope Hobhouse is still very much with us, living in England in her beautiful garden. So I want to thank you all. Everyone always asks, you know, where they can get the samples and so forth. it's a challenge, I'll be honest with you, getting our memos fabricated at this point. But if you reach out to your showrooms, and here's the list of them, you'll be able to at least put an order in for them. Given the COVID situation, these mills have had to start and stop and start and stop. And as I'm sure you're all aware, shipping's been a bit of a challenge as well. And but our showrooms do a wonderful job, and you can always reach out to us directly, and we'll send you the memos and do whatever we can to make all of your work that much more beautiful. So thank you for joining us, and very appreciative for having you with us this morning and for you taking your time. So thank you all.
Thank you.
See you on Instagram. See you on Instagram. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Vera, behind the mouse.
Thank you.